Good. Out in Mike Edgington. So it looks like I think we have 7 members now. So I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. And kick things off with our land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and the land. I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on the unceded land of the Dena'ina people and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of the land on which we all live. I think we can proceed to our roll call.
Chair Nolan Clouda.
Present.
Monty. Mr. Brian Flynn.
Present.
Mr. Matthew Harvey.
Present.
Mr. Robert Helzer.
Robert, I think you're muted.
Present. Yep.
Awesome.
He said Lindsay was excused. Mr. Mark Lukin. Ms. Carla McConnell.
Present.
Mr. Jared Riedel. And Ms. Carmela Warfield is also.
Okay. All right, we have quorum to conduct business. Move on to the approval of the agenda. Our big items got our usual informational reports, a little bit of discussion about the bed tax, and Matthew Harvey drafted a resolution for us to discuss on that front. So, which is awesome for doing that. Thank you, Matthew, for doing that. And then we're going to have we're also going to do a selection of a new chair and vice chair if we get nominations today. So, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move.
Al moved. Second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Matthew. Then with that, we can move on to informational reports. For chair's report, I don't have much, a whole lot else to say. I'm definitely very pleased that the group has really come back together again as far as being able to conduct business and getting good consistent attendance, and I'm really pleased at that. Today maybe my last meeting as chair, but it's been a fantastic thing to chair this group and my second tour of duty on it. So I do look forward to being able to pass the baton on as well. But also continuing to serve on the commission. I think for an assembly report, I believe we have Assembly Member Zaletel on the line, and I will go ahead and hand the floor over to you, Meg.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here. So we just wrapped the first quarter budget revision process up last Tuesday. So kind of want to just do a quick overview of where we landed. The assembly did override the mayoral vetoes 11-1 and really stuck. Sorry, I have a whiny puppy. I got a suitcase out today and that was the end of it. So my apologies for the whining in the background. So the assembly really did adhere to its priorities it set forward all the way back before the 120-day memo came out. And those were threefold. 1, employee retention and recruitment. 2, snow removal. And 3, continuing to address our housing crisis. There were, in the first quarter budget revisions, a lot of changes put forward by the administration. In the end, we really stuck the course with kind of stayed true to the course with the 24 budget, even through first quarter. There are actually some really great ideas brought forward by the administration around employee retention and recruitment. But what we did instead of taking up those specific policies is bucketed those funds so that we had some flexibility. We're still waiting on the 22 audit. let alone, 23. And just as a reminder, usually this time of year, we're kind of doing a true up of the past year moving into the next year, and we just have a lot of uncertainty. So while I think we share a lot of priorities, we didn't want to get hemmed into specific policy promises that if we needed to dip into funds to true up past years, that we would have to not be able to keep one of those promises as to its specificity. Secondarily, another issue that we're going to be taking up that the administration really brought forward during first quarter is the MLMP closeout. There appear to be about 5 items that need to be dealt with in pretty short order. So you'll see on our budget and finance committee agenda a new standing item under unfinished business, which will be MLMP closeout. And the intention there is to bring up next week for the first time, really set forward that work plan and leave that space on our agenda. You'll similarly see us move FEMA reimbursements for the 2018 earthquake into unfinished business and only get updates when those are needed, so that we can really kind of have these rolling items that we need to take up when it's appropriate. Lastly, just on the budget, there had been a request by the administration for us to take about an additional $4 million from AWU's net income position and move that over in a dividend type format into general government. We did not do that. Instead, we are relying on our historical or our history of being able to pull down community assistance. If for some reason that doesn't materialize, we can certainly go back and take a look at our revenue sources. We can also revisit the AWU conversation. We hit pause on that. We did have Mark Corsentino from AWU come and present at Enterprise and Utilities. And we hit pause on that for a couple of reasons. We did do pretty significant revisions to their capital improvement program. They have a very ambitious capital improvement program. A lot of it, though, relies on grant funding. And so just really kind of hedging against whether or not those grants will come through. Secondarily, AWU has been talking quite a bit to us about the changing regulatory landscape around drinking water. And if you happen to see it in the news, the EPA is very aggressively going after PFAS chemicals, or what they call forever chemicals in drinking water. And we don't know the full effect of that for AWU. It is like in real time coming down and coming down pretty hard and fast. And so we wanted to leave that net income position with some flexibility so that we could address whatever might come our way. Again, if the legislature isn't cooperative for some reason and we don't see that community assistance come in, we can come back and revisit things. I think we need to remember we can always do supplemental appropriations and go back and move things around. The fall and spring budget process are just 2 times that we take kind of a more holistic look at the budget, but nothing prevents us from continuing to have those conversations. And then lastly, I'll say we are interested in that you all are taking up this bed tax conversation. We think it will be a part of the conversation moving forward, particularly around once we've met that convention reserve, and then what does it look like for Visit Anchorage in particular to get such a outsized amount of bed tax when it was really never contemplated that bed taxes would come in at such historically high levels. And I think what we'll ultimately see as we move into the fall is probably even a larger revenue conversation, a really holistic one. So I think that's sorry. One last thing I wanted to let you all know is we did reinstate the building safety service area mill levy. And so it went at 0.045 mils, which gets rounded, but it will let us start to, as I like to say, put a Band-Aid on that fund, which probably more or less needs a tourniquet, let alone starting to really chip away at the deficit. But it is a tool. And so we thought we would go ahead, reinstitute that tool even at a low level as we continue to look at the overall fiscal picture. I know it's been a concern of the administration for many years, and I believe, and Sharon will correct me if I'm wrong, but it holds at about it's a pretty significant deficit. It's over $10 million deficit. I think it's close to 14 million. And so we really do need to be addressing it. And that really was aligned with our housing priorities. We don't want to see positions go unstaffed because there's some fear or concern about increasing that deficit. So really adding that mill levy back in so that we can ensure that the building counter is as staffed as possible and building can move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, and I have a question, and I think, Meg, between you and Sharon, I haven't fully understood the building safety service area mill levy. So that's funding that goes in directly into staffing the permitting functions, essentially?
Yes, there are a few positions assigned directly to that mill levy. And so for the years we haven't had it, we've just been basically creating a debt. Or I don't know if it's accurate to call it this, and Sharon will let me know if I'm being inaccurate. Basically, general government's kind of been loaning money to fill those positions because they've been filled and paid for, but unfortunately, we haven't had the mill levy for those positions that are supposed to be billed directly to that fund.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, excellent. Al?
I have a question on the fuel tax. I thought that we had passed that and recommended it to the assembly at that time, that would be put into, a trust fund and be used to maintain roads. Where's that going? Just in the general account?
I believe fuel taxes do just go in as one of the taxes collected that go into general government. I do not know whether or not in order to move that tax into a specific fund or for a specific purpose, if we would, if that would be considered a dedication or not. If the Budget Advisory Commission has passed a resolution, if you could drop that back into the tops of our inboxes, that would be really helpful, and we can work with Matt and start to investigate that again.
Yeah, because our roads are in horrible condition. And I think that by taking that $13 or $14 million into a dedicated trust account, that would be very, very helpful. So what you want from us is some type of a resolution or letter?
Yeah, it sounded like maybe you've already taken action. If you have, if you can just re-forward that action to us, or just an email or a letter, however you want to convey to us that you would like.
That was a long, long time ago.
Yeah, not anytime recently, not since I've been on the commission.
That was a long time ago. So what you may want to check is some of the historical records.
Sure.
Okay, we can do that. And Matt Farina, our budget analyst, is on, so he's helping capture that issue for us. So we can start to poke around it and take a look. If not next month, the following month, be sure to nudge us and have us give you an update on where we're at with looking at that.
So is there a shortage of funding around road maintenance, or is it just that we've had a winter and we've got potholes and they haven't fixed them yet?
That's,
Because it's, yeah.
he isn't only potholes.
I don't have the number, but I think road projects generally, right, they take so long, they're phased, they're primarily done through bond funding. We're behind. I mean, if you take the whole list of road projects, we're trying to play catch up. It's not unlike our stormwater infrastructure as well, where we know we have a lot of deferred maintenance. And so the question becomes, how can we add projects, but then of course, where's the capacity, right, in terms of actually getting them done? It's a short season. It is something we've talked about as the assembly a little bit. We are interested in figuring out ways to tackle more of the projects. It's also approximately about a decade to get a project from inception to completion. And that road that is on that list doesn't get better in that decade. And so by the time they get repaired, they're quite acute. And in that we can find that the repair or the redo, it can actually be more costly. So we are interested in trying to shorten that time, but there are a lot of factors to consider. And just we kind of are at the what we believe to be right now the kind of historical bonding capacity. And so the question becomes, are there other revenue sources we can bring to the table to address some of those issues? One of the primary issues is if you take something right now that's under the tax cap and is being used as revenue, you're going to have to find a replacement or make a concurrent reduction. So as I said, this revenue conversation is becoming really ripe, and I think we're going to be starting to put some things on the kind of up on the board and moving the pieces and having those conversations as we move into fall.
Okay. Any other members have questions? Okay, well, hearing none, yeah, appreciate the updates. Thank you very much, Meg.
Yep, thank you.
We can move on to our updates from the Anchorage School District, and I think we have both Katie and Kelly online. Yeah, so whoever wants to take it first.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Katie, for being here. Thank you all for being here. I will try to give you a great overview of what's happening in ASD right now. I know that certainly a lot of folks are wondering what's happening with the correspondence school ruling. Anchorage certainly does have correspondence students. They are an important part of our district. I'm pleased that ASD has resumed processing correspondence student allotments, their reimbursements, now that a stay has been implemented. I think it's important for the community to know that the Anchorage School Board is advocating for the State Board of Education to meet as soon as possible to enact regulations that would provide for constitutional correspondence study programs for next school year and beyond. We have a website that's sort of a hot topics page where information is being gathered. And again, the sort of the main URL for ASD is asdk12.org and then /amicus, AMICUS. That is the hub for following along what's happening with the correspondence school ruling insofar as it pertains to ASD. Last week, the district launched what it's called its right sizing initiative to address things that we've certainly talked about before: Anchorage's declining population, the district's aging school facilities, the fact that some of our schools are operating below capacity. We have an important context that our student body requires more specialized services beyond the education classroom than in the past. So let's think about like our students with special education needs, especially those with intensive needs. Schools are increasingly relying on grade level combo classes and itinerant staff to deliver services. So community members are being asked right now to take ASD's survey and learn more. Again, I'm going to give you, and I can follow up with an email with these. So asdk12.org/right size, RIGHTSIZE. And those, the surveys are actually available in a number of languages as well. The board had, let's see, maybe I'll go back about a week. We had a finance committee meeting. We reviewed our P card audit. Those are our purchasing cards, and really found that, out of about $17 million in total P card purchases, that's more than 75,000 individual purchases by more than 1,100 card holders. Most employees are in fact complying with policies and procedures. There were a few findings, and management is really tailoring its responses to those individuals or a couple of schools. So the degree of accidental misuse appears to be very small. We also reviewed our grants, what's happening with our grants and development office. Frankly, I think we may need to invest a slightly greater proportion of our budget to folks that have a high return on investment. They have procured about $18 million, I think it's about $18 million in grants so far this year. They've got a 56% win rate. And I think that's a really important part of our school system. And then the third item on our agenda at that finance meeting was a request for an update on the maintenance of equity issue. And again, this is really more of a state deed conversation with the U.S. Department of Education. It's likely that the federal government is going to be requiring the state to compensate the Anchorage School District some amount of money. That has varied. We really don't have certainty on where that's going. So that's just something that we're going to circle back on hopefully in a couple of weeks at our next Finance Committee meeting. The Anchorage School Board had a work session and a meeting on the 7th, so on Tuesday this week. As reported in this morning's paper, we discussed the Academies of Anchorage initiative, and the administration unveiled what its proposed academies, these are sort of career technology, CTE, they're industry aligned academies with pathways under each of the academies at each of the comprehensive high schools. So we had a really good conversation about that. But the hub for everything under the academy system is asdk12.org/CCL. That's like well, College Career Life is what it stands for. We also swore in the board members who were reelected in the April election. The board elected a new president for the upcoming year. That'll be Andy Holloman. And it was a non-action item, but we spent some time discussing a proposed master plan for Bartlett High School, which is now more than 50 years old, and was originally built both as it's sort of two separate buildings that have come together in quite an interesting assortment of, I think there's like 5 levels to the school and a big atrium, but it has a number of structural problems. Frankly, there's asbestos, lead, mercury, and PCBs in the building, but the administration was presenting really like a 3-phase multi-year renovation plan to improve the space, the safety, and its ability to deliver kind of a modern course of instruction for those students. So that was not voted on. That will be an action item. The approval of a master plan for Bartlett High School would be an action item in 2 more weeks. And then the Academies of Anchorage, I believe, will be a non-action item on the 21st of May. And then we will be voting on that at the first meeting in June, which I think is June 4th. So we haven't officially seen the memorandum, the proposal, but we had a thorough discussion about it. So I will pause there and maybe let Katie fill in whatever I overlooked.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead, Katie.
All right. Thank you. Member Lessons did an excellent job. All of the things on my list, she hit those with specificity. So I guess the thing that I would include is that the last final notice that we received related to maintenance of equity, essentially, it was a response to the last appeal that the state did to the U.S. Department of Education, and the U.S. Department of Education did deny that appeal, but they did make some adjustments based on the state's argument. So the updated number for the amount that's considered a funding reduction or that was disproportionate to not meet the maintenance of equity requirement was about $6.6 million to ASD. And there was a statement that if the state would essentially, I'm pulling on my memory, but essentially if there was confirmation of an appropriations request being made to the legislature for that amount by a certain date, that that the U.S. Department of Ed would remove the high risk designation from Alaska. To my knowledge, that has not been made. So we'll see kind of where it's kind of a wait and see, similar to how we're kind of navigating the potentially impending budget revision that we'll need to do for FY25. It's kind of a wait and see for what the legislature ends up doing and where the governor lands on it. So All of the things that Member Lesson said was on my list of kind of the things that are at the top of our radar, and we'll probably have more information related to budgetary items in about a month or so.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Questions from commission members? Yeah, Al?
Yeah, I think that you probably should take a look at your debt. We, the taxpayers, are carrying a lot of debt. And I would suggest that in the future that you apply for less bonds than what you're paying off. And that'll free up some cash over time also.
Noted. One of the things I guess I would also mention that Ms. Lesson said is the district is putting a lot of elbow grease into looking for ways to fund things that the district wants and needs to be doing. So she had mentioned the development and grants department presentation at the recent finance committee meeting. And that department is really gearing up to be very aggressive in pursuing other forms of revenue and to leveraging those opportunities to do some of the innovative things that we're looking to do, and has been very successful in the last year. So building some capacity in that department to continue that work is kind of, on our radar, because we know that, with the flat funding, we need to be kind of, I guess, resourceful and innovative in the way that we're continuing to provide services.
The maintenance of equity issue is about is concerned with the federal money that the state hasn't been dispersing properly according to the U.S. Department of Education. So what's the shortfall that ASD believes Anchorage is due that didn't receive? Do we know a dollar amount?
Great question. Yeah. So essentially that amount has changed based on the back and forth and the arguments about the methodology that the state is proposing to use with the U.S. Department of Ed to determine maintenance of equity. So the most recent amount is that 6.6 million. So that actually is 6.4 million for FY22, and then a smaller 200,000 amount for FY23. And it's a bit of a confusing issue because it is connected to the ESSER funds that the district receives specifically under the American Rescue Plan Act. But it's not based on the spending. It was based on one of the requirements that the state had to attest to in order to receive those funds on behalf of the districts. So it really is related to the U.S. Department of Ed saying you attested to abiding by a requirement of providing a certain level of funding for your districts based on this methodology that we've established, and you didn't do that. The problem with that is that period of time was pretty chaotic. If you'll remember, there was a lot of money in legislation that was being pushed out to address relief issues. And then there was rulemaking that took place after some of that was authorized and pushed out to the states. So there was a delay in establishing how that maintenance of equity standard was going to be assessed. And what ended up happening is essentially the method that was established for determining maintenance of equity was one that you could not plan ahead to know how it was going to settle out. You kind of had to wait till the end of the year and then retroactively decide whether or not maintenance of equity had been met based on kind of the ins and outs of that formula of assessing that. And so it really made it very, very difficult for states or districts, for that matter, to be able to do things in a way that ensured maintenance of equity standard was met. So you may have heard in some of the articles that most states actually failed maintenance of equity and then handled, you know, bringing that to a resolution in many different ways. But most of the states did choose to accept the department's determination and provide that supplemental appropriation.
Al?
If you get that money, how are you gonna do with it?
Well, we probably will add that back into our fund balance to be able to forward into future years balances that we use for budgeting. I doubt that we will, you know, kind of make use of spending that right away, but that also is to be determined by the school board. And so what we would do is we would take that back and include that in the amount of revenue that we had available to make decisions with. And then the administration would make a recommendation for, you know, putting that into the pot, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, from my perspective, the board has 3 goals for reading proficiency, math proficiency, and college career life readiness. And I think it's important that we align our resources with those goals, while understanding the larger context that, you know, should we get a dose of one-time funding, you know, at the $680 per pupil level, that's not going to close the projected FY26 deficit. And we have a huge degree of risk in the FY25 budget as proposed. So it'll be a conversation to be sure. But it is an important conversation to have. But I would like to see our dollars align with our goals. But there's a lot of budget gap to close in that process.
Other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate the updates, Katie and Kelly.
All right. Thank you so much.
Then we can move on to OMB report if you have one, Sharon.
I do. I have a written statement.
Oh,
And I appreciate the opportunity to be heard.
all right.
When I was hired to be OMB director, I wanted to be as invisible as possible. And so before rejoining the city, I actually pulled my Facebook page down. And then when I was hired and they wanted to issue a press release and take my photograph, I declined. But I found myself in a position where my attempts at being invisible have failed. And so as I leave, I'd like to make a statement. Up until the very day that Enron imploded, investors were purchasing Enron stock and relying upon the company's financial statements as the basis for their investment decisions. But as we now know, before the implosion occurred, a whistleblower communicated to the highest levels that debt was being understated and earnings overstated. Enron was one of the first companies to bring the concept of off-balance sheet liabilities to the public's attention. Most people do not know that when I was hired in 2023, I was hired not to perform one job, but 2 jobs. The first was OMB director, but the second job was to close out municipal light and power. MLNP was sold in 2020, and several key MLNP executives were approved to receive special compensation packages by a prior administration to stay on after the transaction occurred. Yet, the 2020 MLNP sale transaction was not recorded in 2020 or 2021 by those individuals. As I dug into MLNP, I learned that there were problems associated with a $50 million appropriation to build what is called the Alaska Center for Treatment. I brought the problem and a correction to the Assembly as part of the Q1 budget process. The Assembly reversed the correction, and now there is no funding to correct the problem. During conversations, I came to learn that the Assembly might believe that it's possible all settling parties to the settlement agreement, that required the Alaska Center for Treatment be built might agree to amend that agreement to allow operating expenses such as electricity and security guards to be treated as allowable costs under that $15 million spend requirement. Theoretically, this might be possible and all settling parties might agree to such an amendment. However, it is possible the Assembly might also believe that operating expenses can be capitalized to the asset known as the former Gold Line Hotel and recorded therefore as an asset. If so, that would nullify the need for a correction. There are two accounting provisions you would refer to decide if this is correct or incorrect. Number one is GASB 34, paragraph 18, and it refers to how you report the initial acquisition of a capital asset, such as the former Golden Lion Hotel. And this GASB 34, paragraph 18 does not allow several years of utility costs and security guard costs to be capitalized to a capital asset long after it's acquired. The second accounting provision deals with capitalization of improvements to an existing fixed asset. The rules require that improvements be capitalized only if either A, an expenditure increases the life of an asset, gives it more life, or B, increases the value of an asset and the expenditure exceeds the entity's capitalization threshold. And government rules encourage entities such as the municipality of Anchorage to set high thresholds, and they encourage a minimum threshold of $5,000. Ours is $5,000. So ours is set essentially pretty low relative to our size. And this policy can be found on page 51 of the ACFR for anyone who would like to check it out. Electricity costs and security guard charges would not and do not qualify for capitalization because they don't meet any of the requirements. A local newspaper, I think yesterday, published an article on Tuesday about the budget. The newspaper interviewed 3 Assembly members that did not attempt to speak with me about the amendments the Assembly reversed. One Assembly member was quoted as saying that OMB was proposing, quote, drastic policy decisions, end of quote. Wrapping up ML&P is not a policy decision. It is a requirement that should have been implemented in 2020 or 2021, or it would have been reported late in 2022, but it must be implemented in 2023 and therefore is mandatory. Further, fixing accounting mistakes is not a drastic policy decision. Complying with national accounting standards and our own accounting standards is taking action to comply with existing policy. And now we lack a funding means to pursue the correction. The article also said that I was the 5th OMB director in a short period of time. And in fact, I think I might be the first OMB director who's a CPA in a 15-year period of time. 15 years ago, we had CPAs in the 3 key roles of controller, CFO, and OMB director. And if we had that all along for the last 15 years, we would not have OMB correcting these errors because the errors wouldn't have occurred in the first place and the OMB would have been closed out quickly. And so OMB wouldn't have found itself in the uncomfortable role of correcting errors. But if we're going to find a mistake, we're going to roll up our sleeves and try to correct it. I would like to share with you my understanding of what these off-balance sheet items, when I was referring to Enron, include. They are as follows, but are not limited to. Number one, we have a problem with workers' comp and general liability. That fund has built a deficit, and that deficit started 20 years ago. We proposed step 1 to correcting that deficit, and the Assembly reversed it. Number 2, the ML&P errors that I just referred to, we proposed a correction to that and provided funding for it, but the Assembly reversed that. Number 3, there's something that we have not yet shared with the Assembly, and that is that there's a grant allocation holding fund that needs to be cleaned up, and that is an off-balance sheet item because it has not been dealt with for a while. Number 4 is PERS debt that we have not reported to the state of Alaska related to the MLMP sale. Originally, we had proposed correcting that during Q1, but at the Assembly's request, they were not interested in receiving an ordinance, which is a big deal, during Q1. So we scaled back and we agreed that we would handle that one later. Number 5 are possible liabilities relating to the Alaska Center for Treatment or obligation if we default under our obligations under that settlement agreement. Number 6, possible shortfalls relating to the MLMP closeout itself. Number 7, building safety service area deficit, and we did cooperatively take steps to work on number 7. And then number 8 is the fund balance deficit itself. And I call that an off-balance sheet liability only because the Assembly, to defend the Assembly, has not been receiving timely information about the fund balance deficit or balance sheets, balance sheet accounts in general. In my opinion, municipal code is poorly written when it comes to the reports the Assembly receives. It requires that the Assembly receive revenue reports, and those reports are prepared in Word format, and they don't include a total at the bottom to help the Assembly determine if in total we're doing great or bad relating to revenue. Separately, the municipal code requires expenditure reports, which are prepared in Excel and do have totals at the bottom. But here's what the Assembly is not receiving because code does not require it. They don't receive balance sheets except once a year when the AFRs are issued, much less information about off-balance sheet risks and liabilities.
You mean to say that they don't see a balance sheet?
No, but they used to. Now, here's the problem. You could say, well, let's just fix code and put in requirements for proper accounting reports to be prepared. But when the SAP system was implemented, a decision was made to implement SAP without simultaneously purchasing reports. So our SAP system does not have the ability to produce the reports that the Assembly needs in order to make educated decisions.
Who made that decision?
Before my time.
Okay,
So I can't say.
Right.
But I think it was probably a matter of SAP being over budget and delayed.
Yeah.
And so it just had to be. But I don't want to.
so they never came back and purchased that part.
Well, so when I was first hired and I learned that there were no reports and the Assembly was not receiving balance sheets, I wanted to correct that because it was important for the Assembly to know the whole picture. And so I implemented a help desk ticket to let's get the reports. And the problem is that right now IT is wrapped up in implementing an ERP improvement called HANA. So I think it will be at least a couple of years before we can get back to the basics, which is get the Assembly balance sheets more often than once a year when the AFRs come out. So to wrap up, I'm sorry that there is an impression that the Q1 budget didn't go well. I feel like I did the ethical thing by bringing these issues to the Assembly's attention, and I was disappointed when all of them except one were reversed by the Assembly. And now I simply don't know what to do to close that MLP because there's no funding to do so. So that's my story. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. So the 15 million you're talking about that you were initially mentioned, that who owes who that money?
Okay, so we don't owe anybody money at the current time. When the MLMP sale was being floated, an intervener intervened, claiming to have standing in the potential sale, and a settlement was agreed upon. And the settlement requires that the proceeds from the sale went into a whole bunch of different buckets, and one of the buckets was a $15 million bucket, in accordance with the settlement that the settling parties agreed to. And this $15 million was to be spent to build plan and design. Interestingly, not to purchase, but to build, plan and design an Alaska Center for Treatment to help the people in our community who need help. And there was a deadline associated with that requirement. The wording of the settlement agreement does not allow for operating expenses associated with the treatment to be, for that $50 million to be spent on operating expenses. We are now pushing against the deadline for that obligation for the Alaska Center for Treatment, but recently we received a clear communication from Assembly leadership that the path that we were going on was not the path they wanted us to go on. And so now we are deflecting, and the plan is, and Meg can correct me if I'm wrong, to issue a well-written RFP with input from Assembly leadership, in particular Chair Chris Constant, that would be issued nationwide, not just to Alaska providers, and that the existing facility become the Alaska Center for Treatment. But time is our enemy at this point, so we need to get hopping.
Yeah. Well, I'd be very careful invoking the Enron as part of your statement. I mean, it definitely like sends chills as far as, what the scale of the challenges, and not to downplay, these all seem like, serious issues, but yeah, I'd be careful with that kind of language.
The point in invoking Enron is the idea of, when did we first start talking about the concept of off-balance sheet liabilities? You can get financial statements and think things are okay. But if there are other aspects of risk that are not reflected on your financial statements, and someone shares them with you and communicates them to you, it's worthwhile to consider listening.
Oh, absolutely. Other members have questions? Brian, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Sharon, for the input. I missed, or perhaps I didn't hear, when is this supposed to come more to light, or for the Alaska Treatment Center? When is it supposed to be online?
I believe it's October 2025.
Okay. And to date, they don't have any kind of plan in place, correct?
Well, I wouldn't say there's no plan in place. I think that the administration had met with providers, and after meeting with providers and gaining far more understanding about this type of project, our understanding of best practice changed. And we also, of course, toured the property as well. And so we thought that what we were pursuing would be entirely consistent with what the Assembly would support. But what we learned was the Assembly's vision was different. And so it's very important to support the Assembly's vision in this instance. And yet this RFP, I think, would be more in the realm, in the swim lane of the health department, taking the lead on writing it. And so I think at this point, it would almost behoove us to pass the baton to the health department and encourage them to connect with Assembly leadership to make sure that the RFP goes out fairly soon with heavy input from Assembly leadership, but on a national scale, possibly with assistance from a third-party consultant to make sure that this time when we issue an RFP that we receive responses from prospective providers, because we want to avoid a situation where we issue an RFP and we don't receive any responses.
Okay, thank you.
Matthew, your hand is up.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Sharon. Two things. One is if you have anything in writing that can be followed up with the committee, specifically, I mean, you had a list of things, whatever you're comfortable sharing with the committee, I think I'd appreciate it. Then we kind of get a little bit more time to digest it and go off and think about it a little bit more. And then I don't think there's a lot of value in getting into like a back and forth, but I see Assembly Members Alatel is still here, and it was touched on a little bit. I don't know. I'd leave it up to the chair, but do you think there's value in having at least the other perspective?
I think so, and I saw Meg's hand go up. So yes, I would like to give Meg a chance to respond as well.
Thank you. I hope I'm not, okay, there we go. Sorry, I hope I'm not frozen. So two things. One, on the Golden Lion and the Alaska Center for Treatment, I agree with Ms. Lechner. This RFP process should be in the purview of the health department. This is where it gets tough when you have substantial vacancies to get this kind of major work out the door. I am hopeful that they can get health department cooperation, or we should look to a third party with this kind of expertise. It should not be budget and finance that is taking up the substantive pieces of that RFP process. Just as a quick reminder, the building was purchased with part of that 15 million. It was always presumed that those capital expenditures would also come after a provider was selected to make any building modifications suitable to the treatment needs and the programmatic arrangement. So hopefully that conversation is kicked back off. I do agree, time is of the essence. We are working on that October 25 deadline. With regard to MLMP, more generally, when I mentioned that we have now a standing item in our budget committee moving forward, it is how we intend to address these issues. We can always go back and make different appropriation decisions, make supplemental appropriations. It is not a one and done opportunity. We just felt that we need more opportunity to digest a number of these things and have a broader discussion amongst the body. That is why we have now made them a standing item on the Budget and Finance Committee. We are a body of 12 people. Some of us are really into the budget and some of us are less familiar with the budget. And 1Q has never been a time to take up really big, substantial changes. We don't doubt the seriousness or even the urgency of doing so. We just don't think this was the last opportunity. And we have 5 points that the CFO and OMB have identified that we need to work on. So we hope to talk next week about what's that work plan, how do we want to sequence those things and address them moving forward.
Thank you, Meg. Matthew, did you have another comment?
Yeah, if I could just follow up really quick. So Assembly Members Alatel, it sounds like you have those 5 items. Is that something that would be a public document at the next finance meeting then? Or to be able to find it on the municipality's website?
So there were the items that we took down in our notes from Ms. Lechner and Alden, CFO, Mr. Thurn. And so we can delineate those on the agenda. What we want to do then is come up with the work plan. So then as we address them either one by one or in groups, they can be on the agenda and called out moving forward.
Thank you. And Carla, I see your hand.
Mute. Just a comment. Sharon, I really appreciate your when you come in and speak to us, how you bring some of these things up and that you do explain it in a different way than possibly we've heard it in the past. A lot of people are, I think, afraid of exposing the ugliness sometimes of what goes on in a municipality, in a city organization such as ours. So I saw, keeping under the radar, I saw in the paper that you have rendered your resignation depending on certain circumstances, but I do want to let you know how much I appreciate how candid you've been with this commission and given us this information. So best wishes, definitely.
Thank you.
So I had missed that. So you have submitted your resignation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, I do thank you for your service. It's a heavy topic. So a lot to digest, a lot to process. I think as Matthew had said, if you have, I don't know if your statement is something that you can share with us by email, or if it's in that type of a format or anything like that, but
I sort of started to ad lib toward the end. So
it sounded like it was very
planning on
prepared.
doing. I could come up with a list of the off-balance sheet items. Because I think it's important to start tracking those after I'm gone. And I think if I were to write them down, because I was just jotting them down as I was sitting here, I think the list would include maybe one or two other items. Because I was trying to work off of memory. But I do think that I do think the assembly is very hampered in its defense, because receiving an income statement without a balance sheet is like running a marathon with one leg. Balance sheets provide, in my opinion, the most critical information, and the assembly deserves to receive balance sheet information more timely than it does.
Yeah, I can't imagine running a business without
Yeah.
looking at balance sheets. You know, as a person who looks at a lot of financials myself.
So
Chair-
they
Chair
have
Nolan,
to
this
add
is-
on the mod, I'm sorry.
You can.
No, you go ahead,
Yeah,
Al.
Al, and then Matthew. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Al.
So that they're not gonna be able to get a balance sheet quarterly till next year?
Well, so the 2022 balance sheets should ideally come out very soon. But the problem is, in my opinion, the assembly right now in their hands should have balance sheets for March 31st, 2024. Not 2022,
Yeah.
not 2023.
Good.
March 31st, 2024, because today is May 9th. And further, one of my observations is that a lot of entries are not recorded until long after the year is closed. Like one example is tax anticipation notes. So in the years when we do transact tax anticipation notes, when you transact them in April, you know on the day you transact them,
Right.
all the expense to the penny. Why are, for years, for decades, we wait until month 13 or 14 to record that expenditure is beyond me. We should record them the month that they transact. And then if you have to allocate it out to the months, so be it.
Yeah.
And so so not only does the assembly not receive balance sheets, but the income statements, well, they don't even receive income statements. The expenditure reports that they receive omit any transaction that's not recorded timely, and we are not recording all of the transactions timely. And so I don't believe the assembly is receiving the information that they deserve to receive. And I think we can get better. And step one is record the transactions timely, but number two, we have to get some form of balance sheet information in front of the assembly, even if it's in Word format. Because right now, I do think some of this MLMP stuff, I don't think that in 2022, the assembly was receiving regular updates on the MLMP closeout. So I think in their defense, this came as a surprise to them. And if so, I'm sorry, if I had been here for 15 months, it would not have been a surprise to them. But that doesn't mean I could look the other way when I saw the mistakes. I just couldn't do that.
So, okay, so Matthew in my queue, and then Brian, and then we do have to move on.
Yeah, appreciate it. I guess just to kind of clarify, if in a perfect world, what we could get written down would be those references, specifically like the GASB references, and you mentioned where in the act for some of this information would be, as well as the off-balance sheet items. And it sounds like that's kind of a separate issue as well, with maybe like recommendations for things to look at moving forward with regards to reporting, or the kind of some of the paths forward that you had mentioned, with regards to if there is any way to to buy a module for SAP or what that would look like implementation wise, or if that's a new project that would need to be initiated. Kind of those like what happened, off balance sheet items, the other things that need to help that would be enabled or that would enable this to not happen in the future. And
Okay,
recommendations. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Brian? Are you speaking, Brian? We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you call my
Oh,
name. I
yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I just, first of all, kind of want to dovetail off of Carla and tell you, Sharon, how much I appreciate your enlightenment and your comments today and prior to today. It's very helpful in navigating through some of the things that we don't get to see or hear very often. And so I do want to say thank you for what you've done, and I believe you're here through the end of June. Is that correct?
Correct.
And also, you know, you were saying that we're back to 2022 and not providing those balance sheets to the assembly. Is there any sort of logic that you've come across that would be a reason for that? Because it doesn't seem like, I mean, I know in my line of business, not having a balance sheet for 1 year, but also going back 2 years would be disastrous. So I'm just trying to get some understanding of what or who in prior administrations going back, what it sounds like 15, 20 years ago would have been thinking by not providing those to the assembly.
so, and I know we have to move on, so I'll answer this question.
Mhm.
So before SAP was implemented, we operated under the PeopleSoft system. And the assembly did receive either monthly or quarterly financial reports. They were prepared by the controller division, which makes sense rather than Trevor and OMB, because the controller division is the one that actually is supposed to issue financial reports. And they included, you know, what we would think of as a quote unquote full report, which would be balance sheet, income statement with a cover letter. But when SAP was implemented, I think in order to just get it running, a tough decision was made. You know, sometimes you have to make triage decisions, and a tough decision was made to implement SAP without reports. And that is one of the reasons why, since that time, even if the code didn't require it, we couldn't provide it to the assembly the kind of balance sheets they need to see, not just general fund, but also those pesky side funds that need to be cleaned up that would affect the general fund. Because we can't press a button that says balance sheet. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There's no button.
Yeah, which if you have a small business and you have QuickBooks, it would
Press the
work that
button.
way. Yeah.
Press the button.
Could you, just out of curiosity, I'd like to see a copy of the March 31st, 2024 profit and loss. How many pages?
Yeah, that's doable. Yes, we can do that. Well, no, I take it back. We can't do it. Let me tell you why. What we can give you is the March 31st expenditure report. But the problem is, and this is why I will defend the assembly. We can give you the expenditure report, but the revenue report is written in Word, not Excel. It
Okay,
doesn't have a total
I
and
got it.
isn't sorted by general fund, non-general fund. And so to have an income statement, you have to marry revenues and expenses.
The gross mess.
Yeah, and so, yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, thank you. I think we do need to move on, but I do appreciate this discussion, so thank you.
Yeah.
The next item up is continuing our discussion from last time about the bed tax. And Matthew prepared a resolution, a draft resolution that I think everybody should have been, I think it was should be in everyone's email, and those of us here in the room have a paper copy, I think. And Meg's signing off. Thank you, Meg. So I don't know if folks have had a chance to review this. Matthew, do you want to like walk us through any aspect of it, or because I have had a chance to read it and mark it up, but I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to kick off the discussion with.
Sure, maybe just a little background. Yeah, so this is based on the presentation that we received last month, and I worked with Mike Edgington. I think he's online here. He was very helpful with some of the technical details and a lot of the whereas statements. But this was just something we workshopped based on that presentation, and I might defer to you on how you'd like to walk through it and work on revisions or analysis. But yeah, overall, the whereas statements kind of walk through historically the code, the changes that were made to it, the effective distribution of room tax revenues as they currently stand, and kind of how to get to or the changes to short-term rentals and other housing units, and how those are baked into room tax revenues or might be gaps in room tax revenues with regards to code. But I'd defer to you on how you'd like to move through the resolution.
Yeah, okay. So Matthew's got several whereas statements that give the background, about the room tax, and does cite some specific sections of code about the distribution, and then the trend about the revenues growing over time, and the STRs being in there as well. So the resolved parts of it basically state that the things that we're urging, on behalf of the BAC, for the Assembly to review and update municipal code and the dedicated distributions of the room tax revenues to reflect current reality. So a general statement about updating those. Further resolved that the definition of promotion of the tourism industry should be clarified to include the possibility of things like capital investments, targeted marketing, enhancements to public facilities, or other relevant areas. And then also that the Assembly should consider the allocation of B&B and short-term rental room tax revenues, focusing on the impacts caused by those to local communities. The fact short-term rentals, likely cause increases in rent, and the establishment of a mitigation fund, and a review and adjustment of the budget lines related to the budget allocations. One thing that I was thinking was what could be included from this is and Mike is on, it looks like. So Mike, I want to make sure I'm stating this correctly too, is that one of the big takeaways that I took from Mike's presentation was that kind of step one with digging into this issue for Assembly action would probably be to require the platforms to provide a certain amount of data about short-term rentals, because we don't know detailed information about the number of short-term rentals, and we don't know the exact, like, the zip codes in which they're located. And so so that information piece seemed like a really important starting point. Mike, am I characterizing that correctly?
Yes, I think that's a good addition.
Yeah. So and I think what you were saying was basically that if the Assembly passed an ordinance that required, VRBO and Airbnb to provide a certain amount of information, they would then be compelled to do it, right?
That's my understanding. Yes, that's my understanding from other municipalities that have done this. And actually, it's a pity Meg isn't here, because I think she's actually working on something now that would do that.
Okay. So I would advocate for another further resolved line that says I don't know how the best way to word it, but something to the effect of the urging Assembly to take action requiring the collection of information from short-term rental platforms to include, it doesn't have to be super detailed, I guess, but to include the numbers and locations by zip code of short-term rentals. Something along those lines.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just taking a note here. I think that would be valuable. I think kind of no matter what, in order to accomplish some of the other be it resolves, you would probably need that information.
Yeah. And of course, that would have the unfortunate effect of turning your beautiful one-page resolution into one of those ugly, where there's like an extra sentence on the second page kind of deal. Maybe you could just shrink the font a little bit, something, or get rid of the.
It's okay. On Word, it's already 2 pages. So.
Oh.
So I know I'm not on the train. Can I propose some friendly amendments?
Yeah, go ahead, please
Okay,
do.
So, the administration really wants to express its gratitude to Mike because he's been the leader on researching this and doing the hard work to figure out that we have an opportunity here. And if it weren't for Mike, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So I personally want to express my gratitude for your intelligence and tenacity, because it really took a lot of tenacity to even have this conversation. But following the last time that Mike and I spoke, we learned something that was a temporary setback, which is that we have an existing contract with the Anchorage Convention Visitors Bureau that requires that not only, their share, but any excess go to them, which is unfortunate, but that contract is soon to expire, which is good.
Right.
So I would offer a friendly amendment for this committee's consideration. And where I would put it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the bottom to say, be it further reserved that the BAC urges the assembly to review and update the municipal code and dedicated distributions of room tax revenues to reflect current financial realities and agreements, including limitations in existing contracts, if any, until those contracts expire. So in other words, we're acknowledging that in the short run, we're a little bit not happy, but once that contract expires, then
It's a whole new world.
the whole new world, exactly. And then I would suggest one more be it further resolved, because here's the key. We have to remember that we don't want to extend the existing contract. Because if we extend the existing contract, what happens?
You're stuck.
We're stuck, right? Or we want to make sure that purchasing, when they do the RFP for the next contract, that they don't inadvertently copy the language from the current contract and repeat it, because then we could be stuck for 5 years or longer. So I propose another friendly amendment, which is be it further resolved that all future contracts, and I think we could probably do a little bit better because I'm doing this on the fly, that all future contracts shall cap room tax revenues to ensure that excess room tax revenues are available for appropriation by the Anchorage Assembly. And I think someone could do better than that. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get it in this resolution that the next contract, that excess money should come to our community and not to one vendor who already gets a lot of money.
Well, the fact is that money should go back to the taxpayers.
Yes.
Well, that's an opinion, but yes.
Yeah. But if the committee would consider those friendly amendments, I'd really like, maybe my final gift to our community is to make sure that next contract gives Mike, solidifies what Mike is trying to do. And that contract expires fairly soon too, which is good.
I believe it's the end of this year, isn't it? I
Yes,
believe it's actually the end of 2024. The new one starts in 2025, so we should be in the process of.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and again, I personally, I am an advocate of, doing tourism marketing, so I certainly don't want to totally cut the rug out from under Visit Anchorage. But I think, I think reviewing and looking at these things and thinking about the amount of money going there is totally appropriate.
If I can just add one thing, sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think even when the current contract was signed, the expectation was this would be in the $5 million area rather than the sort of 15 to 20 area which we're currently looking at. So
Exactly.
Right.
Even just this 10-year contract, we've seen such a change in the revenues.
We're at risk for a lot of turnover in the next few months. If we have a new purchasing director who hasn't had any of these conversations and then the RFP goes out, there we have some risk. And if we added that whereas, it might somehow mitigate the risk slightly.
Yep, good point. Matthew.
Yeah, I might propose both those friendly amendments just be a short, be it further resolved, focused on expiring and future contracts. and wording it in a way that those future contracts are written in a way that, as you're mentioning, deals with excess room tax revenues as mentioned. I think I'd support that. And also just like a general note, I'd say too, and this is something I was hoping everybody could check me on, is with the Be It Resolves, it's kind of like walking that line between being the technical advisory committee and advocating for policy decisions. I think we did pretty good with that and with the recommendations today as well. It's just a kind of avoiding the policy decisions. If I have any in here that aren't policy decision heavy enough, or maybe are too policy decision heavy, just that'd be something I'd ask to check as well.
Do you, and so are you able to draft a version that incorporates those changes then, Matthew? Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your effort on that. As far as taking action on this, I think what we've been able to do, like with our budget resolution, is we've been able to do it by approved by email. Is that what we should do in this one, or should we? Because we don't have the final language in front of us quite yet. So should we do an email approval like we have done in the past? I think that's been considered appropriate. Mike?
So I wasn't answering the email question. I was there's one more thing I'd like to add to Sharon. Further of all, I'd like to add to everybody else who's thanking Sharon. I've learned so much just in the last few months from Sharon. The second thing I was going to say is, even in the contract that's there now, there is the subject to appropriations language. So while it's sort of tricky to go against the intent of a contract and the amounts that are supposed to be in a contract, it is still subject to appropriation. So it's not that there's absolutely no option here. It's just perhaps a less ideal option of making changes before the contract itself is updated. But that's beyond my pay grade. That's an assembly decision.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Al.
Yeah, I think if you could do a revised draft with that new language, just circulate it to us, early, so we can get back to you if we have any questions and stuff. And I think at that point, we probably could vote on it at the next meeting, possibly.
We could vote it at the next meeting. It's even it's nice to have these things move a little quicker, because we have been able to do these by approval by email. It might be better if we can do that by chance. If you guys are comfortable coordinating that.
I can let you guys know the deadlines for getting things into on-base to the assembly as well, so we can coordinate, what day we need done.
Sure, that would be good.
As well as the template for the resolutions, I'll send that out too.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is there further discussion on the room tax resolution? Doesn't sound like there is, but yeah, I think this is a super important, a policy update, and so I think I really appreciate Mike bringing this to our attention and making yourself available, and Matthew for drafting this. So thank you. But yeah, I think these are very positive changes. I think these would be good improvements. We can move on. Our next item is that we have an open discussion, but I don't know if there's any members of the public or any items for open discussion before we do the selection of chair and vice chair. Does anybody have any other items for discussion that they wanted to bring to the table before we go on to elections? All right, well, let's move on to elections. So I've been chair for about a year this time around, I think, and I'm ready to pass the baton on. So at this point, our procedure is usually to open the floor for nominations, and then give people who are nominated a chance to accept the nomination or not, and then to proceed to vote, and do that for both the chair and the vice chair. Are there any nominations that anybody wants to mention? I do have a nomination, but I want to see if others have one to speak up for as well for chair.
Hey, Nolan, did anybody who was absent today get with you regarding wanting to be a nominee?
As of the last time I checked my email, no, they did not.
Okay.
No, so. So I would like to nominate Matthew Harvey as chair. I think Matthew's done a great job being here for, not necessarily for, I can't remember when you started exactly, Matthew, but it's been a little while, but you've shown a lot of leadership and taken a lot of initiative in drafting this resolution, and also I think lead drafting on our budget resolution last time. So I think Matthew would do an excellent job. And
I second the nomination.
second the nomination. Matthew, would you accept the nomination?
Yeah, I'll accept the nomination. I also wanted to note too, there will be a few times like January through March where I may have to chair virtually, but if everybody's okay with that, then I'd accept the nomination.
Yeah.
Discussion?
Yeah, well, let's see, discussion. If there are other nominations also, those could come forth now.
No, I was just wondering, Matthew, when is your commission up for reconfirmation?
I think I have another year or two.
Okay.
I can check really quick.
Nope, that's, I mean, even if you have a year, that's enough.
Any discussion or other nominations for chair? If there are none, then I believe we could proceed to a vote. So do we need to do a voice? Do we need to do a voice vote on this one, or
I just call the roll.
call it? Yeah. Do we need to do a roll call vote? Yeah. Okay. Let's vote then. Yes.
Altamani,
Yes.
Brian Flynn,
Yes.
Matthew Harvey. Accepted.
Yes.
Robert Helzer,
Yes.
the Carl McConnell,
Yes, thank you, Matthew.
and the remaining are absent.
Okay. I think we have a new chair. So I think effective on our next meeting, then Matthew can be the chair. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Nolan.
Thank you. We also need to select a vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Al's been serving in that role currently. Are you wanting to continue in the role, Al?
Yeah, it's an easy slot, yeah.
So Al would like to continue. I would nominate Al then to be vice chair.
I will
Any
second the nomination.
Okay. Any other nominations? Any discussion? Or do you accept the nomination? I think.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, Al accepts the nomination. Any discussion? Right. Well, Al is an institution at the Budget Advisory Commission. Doesn't need any speeches, probably.
85 years, why?
He's learned a couple things. Then let's proceed to a roll call vote.
Nolan Connor,
Yes?
Brian Flynn,
Yes.
Matthew Harvey,
Yes.
Robert Helzer,
Yes.
Carl McConnell,
Yes, thank you, Al.
Okay, we have a new chair and vice chair. So congratulations to Matthew and to Al. Thank you very much. And thank you for being willing to serve. I can share our general information, any information I have about updating the assembly at the monthly budget and finance committee and all of that kind of stuff with you, Matthew.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So then I think our next meeting is scheduled for June 13th, and I don't believe we actually have a topic slated for that. For the meeting on the 13th.
Well, we might do a review of this, this draft. And
We could do that. We could, yeah, unless it's approved before the meeting, because that could be, it might be nice to get it in more timely. But
Right.
it could be kicked off to that. But it probably by that point would just be a vote. Probably wouldn't need a lot more discussion even if we did address it at that meeting.
If you're looking for topics, one possible topic is legal exit. Because, the administration responded to dozens and dozens and dozens of questions posed by Eagle Exit recently. And now, I volunteered to meet with them tomorrow night. And, I think that they're getting close to taking the next step. And so during the process of answering all of their questions, it forced me to visualize how a divorce of assets would look like. And it's actually kind of fascinating. So it's very technical, so you might not want to do it. Very technical.
Is that a topic of interest?
This
I
is
wouldn't
Brian.
mind,
I would be
yeah.
interested in that.
Yeah, this is.
I mean,
fun. Me also.
Okay, I would find that very interesting myself.
I'd be interested in it. I think another topic too for conversation is if we get that discussion list in writing from Sharon, just kind of maybe getting a little bit more into the specifics, depending on what that looks like when we receive it.
Yeah.
And if there is any action that we should take as recommendations.
That's our bond rating.
That would,
I don't have it memorized, but it's good. It's not
Yeah.
a bad bond rating, but it's imperative that our financial statements for 2022 get issued very soon. Because the bond rating agencies have been waiting a long time to receive 2022 and they're losing their patience.
so so actually I would agree also on digging into some of the things that you mentioned, Sharon. I don't know if there's if you have a slide deck of this type of your concerns itemized, but or something like that. I'd like to kind of explore some of these things and have a little bit of space to discuss them, I think. I don't know what that.
My last meeting with you.
It would be your last meeting with us. But if there's stuff that this body should be aware of from an oversight perspective, or things that we should be looking at or following through on, I think that would probably be really useful.
Rather than Eagle Exit, so we don't.
Well, it's I would be very interested in either topic. What's the
We could do.
what's the will of the group? Is there a possibility of doing both? We'd have to make sure to rush through our other reports, probably. What do the members think?
This is Brian. I'd say that if we could do both, it'd be appreciated.
Okay.
Yeah, if we have Sharon only for one more meeting, I think also trying to get through both would be good.
I'll
Okay.
bring the cookies.
I'll bring in cookies.
Okay.
All right.
Well, then it's a yes.
All right, then let's we'll have to manage our next meeting really judiciously to get through to get to both topics. So we'll have to okay, very good. Then with that, I think those are both really excellent topics. Does any member have anything else to say before we adjourn?
Yeah, Nolan, again, in case it missed the first time, thank you again for all the hard work that you've put in for this commission. I know you and I haven't always seen eye to eye, but I think you've done an excellent job.
Well, thank you very much, Carla, and I'm very glad to have you back on the commission again too, after a little hiatus. Thank you, I appreciate that.
I'll second that. Thanks for getting us back to having quorum fairly consistently, to Nolan and everybody as well for showing up.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
third that as well. Thank you, Nolan.
You've done a good job, Nolan.
Thanks, Al. With that, then, is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Okay, second?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded by Al and Carla. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good day.